SFPE's Member Services Manager, and I'm glad you were able to join us today. Today's presentation will cover the different insurance policies that may be relevant to your chapter. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to take a moment to familiarize you with the GoToWebinar system. First, the toolbar that you see on your screen is unique to you, and you may minimize that at any time. You will also notice that due to the large number of individuals on the call today, the default setting for this webinar has all attendees muted. However, we do encourage your participation. So throughout the webinar, if you have a question or would like clarification on a matter, please use the questions toolbar feature and type your question or comment. Those will go directly to me, and I will facilitate a Q&A session with our speaker at the end of the session. If we run out of time, please feel free to follow up with me or your speaker after the event. So let's get started. Today's speaker is Mary Smith. Ms. Smith is an account executive at B.F. Saul Insurance Agency of Maryland, Incorporated. Her previous employers were Marsh & McLennan in New York and Sedgwick James of Virginia. Her background consists of managing, servicing, and marketing various types of commercial, property, liability, special events, and financial insurance products for clients ranging from nonprofit to profit 400 companies. Financial insurance products include directors and liability, the directors, officers, and liability, employment practices liability, special crime, workplace violence, and crime insurance. Mary views the negotiation process of insurance as an art and a science, an art because it must cultivate meaningful relationships with the insurance company, deal with the subsidies of changing market conditions, and underwriting philosophies. It is a science because she must know about all aspects of the corporate structure, financial position, and managerial direction of the company. All of this must be relayed to the insurance carriers in a positive and accurate manner so they can fully recognize the quality and integrity of the management team. In addition, Mary Smith has been instrumental in educating owners and directors within child and private nursery community in Montgomery County, Maryland, on the subject of insurance. Mary has received her designation as a certified professional insurance agent and continues to enhance her knowledge within the insurance industry. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our speaker, Mary, to get started. Thanks, Mary.
Good afternoon. Today's topic is going to be on non-for-profit organization, and I'm going to break it down into two categories. One is going to cover the non-for-profit organization liability section and employment practices. First on the screen you will see non-for-profit organization. It's very critical today to actually all organizations, including non-for-profit, and basically that's because of the litigious environment that we are in. Typically when a claim is filed, or legal documents will name the chapter as well as the individual officer. If no coverage is in place, that means that the directors or officer will have to obtain legal counsel and pay defense costs and expense, thus depleting their personal assets, and as well as the organization assets will be affected. The non-for-profit organization liability protects the organization, its directors and officers against exposures associated with managing and decision-making of the chapter. As you will notice, I have listed allegations that could be brought by different types of organizations. That could be a creditor, lender, governmental agencies, members, corporate partners, and vendors. And under the policy of the nonprofit, there's a definition that is referred to as wrongful acts, and these include errors, misstatement, misrepresentation, act, omission, neglect, and breach of duty. Just want to step back to misrepresentation because that's where a lot of claims come from. And an example of that is that an officer or a director may be accused of misrepresenting ideas of the chapter. Another one that's a hot button is that breach of duty. And basically what it is directors and officers are required by law to display loyalty, obedience, and duties to the chapter. And I want to break this down a little bit in regards to the breach of duty. The duty of care, the directors and officers are required to attend the board meetings. And let's take, for example, if a director or officer fails to obtain or review adequate information concerning the board activities, then it can be accused that they're breaching the duty of care. Another point is duty of loyalty. They have a loyalty to the corporation. So a case of this is that a director, if he commingle funds with the organization or borrow organization funds for his personal use, here he may be accused of breaching his duty of loyalty. And then the final one is that duty of obedience to the chapter. And so if the director or officer fail to perform their duty in accordance with applicable state and federal laws or with the terms of the chapter's bylaws or charter, then it could be alleged that the director or officer is breaching his duty of obedience to the organization. And then we're going to go down to who would be considered officer under the policy, and that would be the director, officer, trustee, manager, and this would include past, present, and future officers and directors. As you can see down below, I also put exclude, and I list that's bodily injury and property damage. Sometimes what I've seen happen is the chapters will think that the general liability will pick up, well, let me rephrase that, the not-for-profit organization liability will pick up bodily injury and property damage, and that's excluded under the policy and covered under the general liability policy or a special event policy. Sometimes you may hold, and that's where that coverage would fall under the general liability and not the non-for-profit organization. Under the non-for-profit organization liability policy, they have another category, and it covers employee practices liability. Again, that coverage is vital because of the type of environment we live in. It's at stages, and personal assets and organization assets are affected as well. Coverage under this section of the policy protects organization, its directors, and employees from employment-related wrongdoings. And these allegations can be brought by employees or volunteers. And this is the key. A lot of times the organization, when they see employment practices or employee practices, they think that they have to have employees. And a lot of times with the chapters, they'll have volunteers. But under the definition of employees, volunteers is included. So that coverage is very critical to nonprofit organizations. And then under that policy or section of the policy, it would include wrongful acts, and these are the categories: discrimination, harassment, and wrongful termination. And then, there's have been claims where there's two categories I've seen. Actually, I've seen all three, but a lot of it stems from the discrimination and the wrongful termination of an executive or director or officer. Insured persons, it would be full-time, part-time, temporary, volunteer. In their capacity, with respect to the defense clause, this is very critical, and this is why you would want it, is because it would pay for the defense costs and expenses and defending you in the allegation that's brought against. So once again, it's an allegation. It doesn't necessarily mean that you may have did anything. It's just that you have to prove that you are innocent in the court of law, and a lot of times that requires expenses. And the types of programs that surround a separate policy, that's what that stands for. The premium starts at $700, and it can go up, and this is just a separate policy. But then there may be a carrier that may consider a master policy that would include other chapters, but the only way that they would do that is if the chapters are not incorporated or unincorporated. And also it depends on the number of participants. And then you have the separate limit, which is required for incorporated, chapters that are incorporated. And the reason for that is that the state laws do not allow them to share limits. And so that's the end. And if you have any questions, I would like to hear that.
Thank you, Mary. Does, let's see, I think we have a question. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions? If so, please send them to me in the chat window. Mary, I have a question. Depending on the size of the chapter, that's obviously going to affect the cost of the insurance. Is there like a price break, or it just kind of depends on each, what are kind of the price breaks?
Well, for the separate policies, I'm seeing premium starts at as low as $7. It's usually $700 and up. That's what drives that. Really is the limit of insurance and the deductible, and that's pretty much like the minimum that the carrier will have anyway. Now, if you were trying to look for a reduction in premium and share it, the only way that that could happen is if you had chapters that were not incorporated, because then they're not required by law to have a separate policy. Usually what happens is what we do is we get the applications completed, and then we send it to quite a few carriers and try to get the best price available for the chapters.
What are the typical actions that chapter or officer may be accused of that would not be covered under this type of coverage?
Oh, that may not be covered under this policy. Okay. One of them is a crime. Let's just say, let's go back with, because I know you treasurers, let's say they stole money from the chapter, all right? That wouldn't be picked up here, not the theft of money. So in that case, you would have to buy a separate policy that would be called a crime insurance policy or fidelity bond, and that would pick up that exposure for that.
Is there any others that you could think of?
The other one, I don't, not many chapters have like benefit plans, but 401k plans, those are not covered under the policy.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah. Now, we talked about the general liability one. A lot of times, I know chapters have the they have special events. And they want to find out if the members attend this event or even have meetings in restaurants. The general liability, there's a need for general liability because the directors and officers policy or non-profit policy will not pick up that exposure.
Okay. Do you know if SFPE has a master program, Mary? I know that you're the SFPE insurance broker.
I'm sorry?
Does SFPE have a master program?
You have a policy, but it's not a master one. I mean, I'm not sure when you say a master, but you do have a policy for this exposure.
What is the minimum limit of insurance / deductible?
Well, the minimum I've seen is like $500,000, and the deductible that could be about $1,000.
Please explain again whether or not an individual chapter can be included under national or should have their own policy? Are they familiar with it? So could national cover the chapters, or since they're separate entities, should the chapters have their own insurance coverage?
The chapters would, again, most of the chapters, and correct me if I'm wrong, they are incorporated, right? So if they're incorporated, they would need to carry their own policy. And so they can't come under a master policy. Right now, if you're talking about the society fire, the chapters are not included in that policy. Again, you got to look back at the state laws, because each policy, each state has its own laws, and the insurance carriers have to adhere by them and attach the appropriate forms to them. And so the state, from my understanding, speaking with the underwriter, the state won't allow chapters that are incorporated to be on a shared policy.
Okay. How would the chapter know if they're, well, I think SFPE doesn't have a policy right now that covers the chapters, right? I think that's a lot of the questions that we're getting.
Yeah, no, not for the chapters. They would have to get their own, but you do have one for headquarters or national. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it looks like at the moment we don't have any other questions. I'll give it another minute, but if no questions come in, feel free to follow up with myself or Mary after the webinar if you have any questions about different policies or even getting quotes for different policies. But thank you again, Mary, for taking the time to present today, and thank you, everyone, for attending. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.